Hey everyone, this is HFY Galactic Empire Fall. Human-made stories, no AI noise, because HFY needs humanity. I'm Kale Vortex. Subscribe and step into the unknown. The calibration strip on the edge of the analysis desk had lifted by less than a millimeter. Mara saw it because the strip had been perfectly flat at the start of the shift. Now one corner stood away from the metal, like it had changed its mind. Not enough to peel, just enough to catch the light when she turned her wrist. She set her pen beside it and pressed the corner down with one fingernail. It stayed flat for 3 seconds. Then it rose again. Across the room, Ilian was bent over the rack housing, one shoulder against the cabinet door, tightening something out of sight. The driver clicked once, then once again after a pause too measured to be accidental. He did not look up. Mara watched the strip a moment longer. The air system moved steadily through the vents. White status lights held. Data columns crawled over the central wall display with the same patient indifference they had shown for the last 9 hours. She slid the pen parallel to the desk edge, not because it needed straightening, but because she preferred one unnecessary certainty within reach. "Did you change the local pressure balance?" she asked. "No." "Humidity?" "No." He eased himself back from the cabinet, checked the driver bit, then set the tool down on the tray with the handle aligned to the tray lip. He always did that. Never fast. Never loosely. Mara touched the strip again. Warm from her finger. Dry. Ordinary. It rose once more. This time Ilian looked over. He crossed the room without haste, stopped beside the desk, and leaned down until his face was level with the strip. His eyes moved from the edge to the vent above them, then to the glass partition beyond the console row. "Airflow isn't strong enough," he said. "No." He reached past her, picked up the pen she had just straightened, and laid it across the raised corner. The strip stayed flat. They watched it for a few seconds. Neither moved. Then the pen rolled a fraction of a turn, too small to make a sound, and stopped with the clip facing upward. The strip rose under it anyway. Not fast. Not enough to lift the pen. Just enough to change the angle of reflected light along the desk. Ilian took the pen back. He did not say anything for several seconds. Then he shifted his attention to the live feed on the wall. The anomaly track had held position since 3:14 station time. No drift relative to the relay body. No identifiable thrust. No transponder. No heat profile consistent with machinery. No mass reading that settled into a model twice in a row. It had appeared inside passive range as a flaw in the background before the system reprocessed the frame and decided the flaw had edges. Not a ship, not debris, not signal noise. At 5:02, survey software had labeled it unresolved body. At 5:07, it had relabeled it unknown object. At 5:11, after the third sensor cross-check, the motion profile had altered by 0.03 degrees. No one had touched it. No emission had been directed toward it. The change was too small to qualify as response, but large enough to break the prior forecast. Since then, it had continued to drift in tiny corrections every time the software settled on a more specific category. Mara had stopped the automatic classifier an hour ago. The object, if it was an object, had remained still ever since. Ilian folded his arms. "The strip moved when you mentioned pressure. I asked about pressure. You directed attention." She looked at him, at adhesive tape. "Calibration strip," he said. She almost smiled, but didn't. "That's not helping your argument." He took the driver from the tray again, more from habit than need, and rotated it once between thumb and forefinger. "We should move the workstation." "Because the desk is nervous?" "Because I don't like two odd things in the same room pretending not to know each other." That was close enough to humor from him to count. Mara turned back to the wall display. The track hung near the edge of a dead survey corridor, beyond normal freight routes, close enough to Kepri relay to be noticed and far enough to avoid docking law by several thousand kilometers. The station had 4 people on rotation this month, 1 damaged antenna arm, and a research charter old enough to be vague in useful places. The other 2 crew were asleep. She did not wake them. Instead, she opened a fresh observation page and left the header blank. Not temporary blank. Intentionally blank. Ilian saw it. You're not tagging the file. No, that will irritate the archive. It already irritates me. He accepted that. Mara noticed him noticing the blank field, the same way she had noticed a raised strip. A small thing, but deliberate. At 5:11, when the automated system had first upgraded unresolved body to unknown object, Heron from Third Watch had said, mostly to himself, if it keeps station like that, it's probably watching. At 5:12, the anomaly shifted another 0.01 degrees. At 5:19, Heron tried probe while dictating his report. At 5:20, one of the passive bands went dark for 19 seconds. Nobody on Kepri believed speech alone could travel vacuum and modify distant matter. That was not the concern. The concern was local systems, predictive layers, signal packaging, the countless quiet ways a station wrapped perception around a thing the moment somebody chose a word for it, name a pattern, and the software leaned closer in that direction. Leaned hard enough, and every sensor began to ask the same question. Maybe that was all this was. A recursive mistake inside old hardware and tired people. But the track corrections had stopped when the classifier stopped. That left a shape in a room nobody wanted to touch. Mara wrote the time, the sensor set, the exact order of earlier labels. No shortcuts. No nouns that outran the evidence. On the next line she wrote, observe change followed categorization event. Mechanism unknown. Avoid narrowing terms. Ilian read over her shoulder and said nothing. On the desk, the strip remained flat. Then Mara reached for the pen again. The strip rose. She left the pen where it was, halfway between notebook and keyboard, and waited. The strip stayed raised while her hand rested above the surface. When she withdrew it, slowly, the strip settled back into place. Ilian stepped to the vent control and shut the nearest register entirely. No difference. He took a thermal wand from the cabinet, checked the reading over the desk surface, then over Mara's hand. Temperature gradient, he said. For my hand, not enough. Static. He clipped a grounding lead to the desk and another to the metal ring at his wrist. The strip did not move. Mara placed 2 fingers near the edge again. The corner lifted. Ilian watched her fingers, not the strip. Do that again. She withdrew, waited, repeated the motion, stopping short of contact. The strip rose a second time, less than before. He crouched and looked along the plane of the desk, one eye half closed, not reacting to heat, not to charge, maybe to interruption. Of what? He straightened, took the notebook from beneath her hand, and set it 3 centimeters to the left. The strip did not move. He took the pen, aligned it with the desk edge, then nudged it out of alignment. Nothing. He put the driver beside the pen, then removed it. Still nothing. Mara said, it moved when I was about to do something, not after I did it. He glanced at her. That's a danger sentence on a station. It's still accurate. The wall display chimed once. Not alarm, just attention requested. A passive scan packet had completed from the outer dish. Mara brought it up. The anomaly still had no stable contour, but the uncertainty map had changed. Not narrowed, rearranged. Areas previously fuzzy had sharpened while other areas blurred, as if the system had been invited to choose and could not decide which choice would cost less. At the bottom of the packet, the advisory engine had inserted its own suggestion. Possible artifact / possible drone / possible organism. Mara stared at the line. Ilian was already beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. Then he reached forward and disabled advisory output entirely. The line vanished. He said, no more offered words. She nodded once. Outside the glass partition, the station corridor ran empty and faintly blue. The lights in that section were on maintenance cycle, dim to half power. Every 30 seconds one fixture took a fraction longer than the others to come up after its scheduled dip. Mara had been meaning to log that. She had not yet done it. The delay now seemed part of a larger discourtesy in the station, as if several systems had begun waiting to see what the humans would say next. Mara stood, picked up her notebook, and moved to the side console near the partition. Different desk, different angle to the wall. Ilian followed with the portable sensor bridge and set it down carefully between them. He aligned its feet to the seam in the floor panel, frowned, and adjusted half a centimeter until it matched. New rule, he said. She waited. No nouns beyond function we can verify locally. Agreed. No predictive prompts. Agreed. No open audio notes. She looked at him. You think spoken language matters? I think packaged attention matters. Spoken language gets packaged. That was close enough to belief from him to notice. Mara opened another blank record. Again, no header. No category tree. The work became slower after that. It also became cleaner. Instead of asking what the anomaly was, they recorded what changed when certain forms of observation were applied. Narrow band passive sweeps. No shift. Thermal inference model. Slight shift in uncertainty distribution. Motion extrapolation, using object assumptions. Vector correction within 32 seconds. Motion extrapolation without class assumptions. No correction. Advisory taxonomy disabled. Stable. 3 times Mara almost wrote a word she then removed. 3 times Ilian adjusted a sensor sequence to strip out embedded priors hidden in the manufacturer defaults. That took him longer than either of them liked. Most human systems were built on the assumption that naming improved accuracy. On ships and stations, it usually did. Faster triage, faster decisions, better odds of staying alive. But sometimes a useful habit became a blind one. Hours passed in quiet pieces. At 9:10, the other crew woke and found them still at the side console with the overhead lights unchanged and the galley untouched. Mara told them only what the sensors had done, not what anyone thought. Heron started to say, so it's... and stopped when Ilian looked at him. To his credit, he stopped fully. No one laughed. The station was too old for that kind of confidence. By noon, they had enough to make the pattern difficult to dismiss. When systems reduce uncertainty by imposing category, the anomaly altered its observable profile. When systems observed without force placement, it held. The effect was small, consistent, quiet enough that a busier crew on a louder station might have missed it entirely. Mara sat back on the console and rubbed the heel of her hand against one eyebrow. Then she took the pen and laid it across her notebook. This time, on the new desk, the paper edge nearest the pen curled upward by a hair's breadth. She and Ilian both saw it. Neither moved. The air vent whispered overhead. A maintenance light in the corridor hesitated, then caught up, on the main wall. The track beyond the station remained exactly where it had chosen to remain. Mara lowered her hand to the page and wrote one line in small, careful letters. First discipline. Do not make it smaller than it is by deciding too soon. She did not read the line aloud. When she finished, she set the pen down very gently and left it there. By 1340 station time, the relay had developed a new kind of quiet, not silence. Kepri relay was never silent. Pumps worked in the walls. Cooling lines whispered behind the ceiling panels. Somewhere aft, an old hinge kept making a dry, careful sound each time the station corrected its orientation by a fraction. The place was full of small admissions. This was different. The crew had begun leaving words unfinished. Mara noticed at first in Heron, because Heron usually filled empty space without effort. He was standing near the galley heater, with one hand on the counter, staring at the water as it climbed toward boil. He looked over his shoulder and asked, "Do you want to run the long-range compare against archived?" He stopped there, not because anyone interrupted him. The word had arrived, and he had chosen not to step into it. Mara said, "Against earlier passive profiles." "Yes." Heron nodded once, relieved not to have to invent a safer sentence on his own. He poured water into 2 metal cups, placed one near Mara's left elbow, and returned to the galley without comment. The cup stayed where he put it. Steam rose in a straight line for several seconds, then drifted toward the vent. Ilian glanced at it, then at the main display. It wasn't there. "No. You know he put it down anyway." "Yes." Mara wrapped one hand around the cup, not to drink yet, only to feel its heat through the steel. He wants a room to stay normal. It won't. People still try. Ilian accepted that, too. On the screen, the passive compare routine had started returning old survey matches. Ice fragments, failed probes, A freighter hull plate from 8 years ago, logged after collision and never collected. The system kept presenting them as percentages, then reducing the confidence each time it checked its own assumptions and found they depended on missing structure. Mara had stripped most of the recommendation layers out of the routine before letting Heron run it. Even so, the software kept reaching. That was its design. It wanted to reduce the dark into something with a use case and a handling procedure. She watched percentages degrade. 42 became 19. 19 became 7. After that, the system stopped offering names and reverted to geometry comparisons with no declared category tree. That seemed to bother it. At the side console, Senna had joined them without fanfare. She was the oldest member of the current rotation, not by much, but enough for the station to seem arranged around her patients when she was awake. She stood with one palm on the back of the chair Mara was not using and read the open logs in silence. Her eyes moved down the page once, then back to the line Mara had written earlier. First discipline. Do not make it smaller than it is by deciding too soon. Senna said, "That's not a procedure." "No," Mara said. "It may need to become one." Ilian shifted a tray of sensor adapters until the edges lined up with the desk seam. Procedures create habits. Habits create assumptions. Senna looked at him, and no procedure creates panic. He did not answer that. Mara took a sip from the cup. The water was too hot. She set it down slightly farther from the notebook than before. A ring of condensation began to form under the base, thin and exact. Senna pulled a spare chair from the wall and turned it around before sitting, arms folded over the backrest. "Tell me from the beginning." Slowly. No compressed conclusions. That was why Mara liked her. So Mara began with the first track appearance in passive range, and moved forward by sequence rather than meaning. She described the classifier's early labels, the small vector corrections, the stop and changes after automatic categorization was disabled, the advisory engine line they had removed. She described the calibration strip rising under interrupted motion rather than contact, then the paper edge curling on the second desk. She included the tests that had failed to matter. She did not say what any of it suggested. When she finished, Senna sat still for a moment. Then she asked, "What changed first?" "The object of the station." Ilian said, "The record says the distant track shifted first." "The record has more confidence in outside space than in desk adhesive." "It should." "That isn't what I asked." He looked at her, then away. Mara saw him reconsidering the sequence, not resisting it. Senna nodded toward the cup. "And now the room is starting to imitate the problem." Mara followed her gaze. The condensation ring under the cup was no longer closed. One section had thinned into a dry gap, as if the metal had been lifted there and set down again. Mara touched the cup lightly. It was stable. Heron noticed them looking and came over from the galley entrance. "I didn't bump the table." "No one said you did," Senna replied. He did not move closer. Ilian leaned down until his sight line was level with the desktop again. Surface tension broke along a slope. "The desk is level," Mara said. "I know." No one touched the cup for the next minute. The ring slowly completed itself again, the dry gap darkening as moisture returned. Then the compare routine chimed. Heron crossed to the terminal, read the output, and pressed 2 fingers against the screen frame as if that would steady the text. "We have one repeat." Mara stood. "What kind?" "Not object class. Signal handling signature." That brought all 4 of them to the screen. The archive match was old, very old by relay standards. It came from a survey packet recorded during the commissioning of Kepri's predecessor array, before the relay itself had been built out to its current size. The packet concerned an outer system mapping buoy that had returned inconsistent contour data from a region of charged dust and dark ice. The record had been buried because the buoy itself later failed, and the survey line was redone by a newer unit. Most of the original notes were routine. One line was not. Contour instability increased after autonomous pattern resolution was enabled. Manual raw capture, reduced drift, cause unresolved. The timestamp sat 18 years in the past. No name had been attached to the phenomenon. No theory appended. The reporting officer had done something unusual and wise. described behavior, flagged a possible relationship, and left the rest alone. Senna read the line twice. So this is not new. Not entirely, Mara said. Or not entirely first noticed, Senna corrected. That mattered too. Ilian asked Heron to open the raw packet. Heron hesitated at the search field, then carefully entered the archive number rather than any descriptive term. The old record unfolded in thin gray panes. Half the formatting was broken. 2 image segments were corrupted. The remaining telemetry still carried the faint arrogance of older systems. Less elegant, more direct, built in an era that assumed hardware would outlive curiosity. Mara read through the operator remarks. Most were dull, in a useful way. Repeated scan settings, calibration notes, a reminder to replace a damaged latch on Bay 2. Then, near the end, another line, recommend withholding inferred descriptors from autonomous loop during unresolved observation. No follow-up, no adoption note, no indication anyone had built that recommendation into later systems. Senna let out a slow breath through her nose. We forgot something important because it was inconvenient. That is one interpretation, Mara said. It is a correct one. No one argued. The outer track on the main display remained steady, almost offensively so. Mara found that steadiness harder to look at now than the earlier corrections. Before, it had at least seemed active. Now it felt patient. Heron said, if the effect is triggered by classification pressure, maybe all we're seeing is sensor recursion. Our systems push a model. The return deforms inside the model. We react to the deformation and think the distant thing is the part that changed. Possible, Mara said, but the paper edge. He had no answer to that. Senna stood and crossed to the partition glass. Her reflection came back faintly from the corridor lights. One fixture dimmed, waited a fraction too long, then returned to full brightness. She watched the delay without comment. After a while, she said, whether it begins outside or inside may not matter yet. The rule holds either way. We stopped forcing a shape onto it. Ilian had already begun isolating subsystems on the side console. I want station functions split from observation functions. Hard separation where possible. How long? An hour for partial. More for clean. Take the hour, Senna said. He nodded and got to work. What Mara valued in him was not speed, though he was fast. It was a refusal to pretend that quick and clean were the same. He opened service layers most operators ignored, removed convenience routines, bypassed shared inference libraries, and rebuilt the passive observation stack so that it accepted raw returns without requesting identity assistance from the wider station net. Every few minutes he stopped to note a dependency he did not like, then cut around it. The work had a physical rhythm. Remove, check, recheck, place tool down, pick it up again, tighten, pause. Mara returned to the archive packet and kept reading. She found the name of the operator who had written the unresolved note. Elian Voss, System Survey, Temporary Assignment. No further records in packet. No attached theory. No incident mark. Just a person who had seen a small dangerous pattern and written it in plain language before someone higher up filed a buoy as defective and moved on. She copied the 2 old lines into their current log, with time reference and archive number, then left space beneath them, not for interpretation, for continuity. On the desk beside her, the cup had cooled enough to drink. She took another sip and grimaced at the metallic taste. Kepri's water always carried a trace of the recycler coils when the load ran high. Senna came back from the glass and placed a folded maintenance sheet beside Mara's notebook. Used paper for working notes. Mara looked at it. Why? Because I trust paper to stay paper longer than I trust this station to keep its categories to itself. That was almost dry enough to count as humor. Mara unfolded the sheet. One side was filled with old repair diagrams for a thermal latch assembly. The other side was blank. She smoothed it flat with her palm and began writing by hand. Time, scan condition, observable change, station side event, simple columns. The act itself slowed thought in a useful way. Keyboards encouraged certainty. Pen strokes carried a little friction, enough to notice when a word arrived too quickly. By mid-afternoon, Ilian had the split stack partly running. Observation data now came in through a narrower path, stripped of most interpretive aids, then dumped into a holding buffer for human review before touching the station net. Clumsy, inefficient. Better, he ran the first clean passive set at 1508. The return appeared as a field of values with no overlaid contour, no suggestive boundaries, no probability shells, just signal differences against background. At first it looked like almost nothing. Then Mara saw it, not in the center, where the old software kept insisting the anomaly should resolve, but along one margin of the variance field, a repeated interruption, fine as thread, bent in a curve too smooth for random scattering and too incomplete to call structure. It was a kind of pattern a modern interface would round into an object before a human ever laid eyes on it. Seen raw, it was stranger and less theatrical. Senna came up behind them. There. Yes, Mara said. Heron squinted. That could still be noise. It could, Mara agreed. Ilian adjusted the gain by a measured step, not enough to decorate the field with artifacts. The thread-like interruption remained. More of it appeared when he overlaid the second raw pass, then the third. Not a closed form, more like the same edge glimpsed from different acts of restraint. Heron said, "It looks like it's hiding." Senna answered before Mara could. "No, it looks like we stopped lying to ourselves about how much we can see." That settled over the room and stayed there. For the next 40 minutes they worked the raw passes by hand. No one rushed. Mara marked repeat features on the maintenance sheet with short pencil ticks. Ilian aligned scan timing to remove a station rotation artifact. Heron compared field discontinuities against dust lane models without giving the discontinuities a name. Senna watched all of them and interrupted only when someone's language got ahead of the evidence. At 1602, a station-wide housekeeping process tried to sync the raw buffer into the general analysis net. Ilian killed it before transfer completed, but not before one line of automated metadata flashed at the top of the holding pane. Emergent object candidate. The thread-like interruption on the raw display shifted. Not away, not closer. It changed curvature by a degree, so small Mara would have missed it an hour earlier. Now she did not miss it. Neither did the others. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Ilian reached over, unplugged the auxiliary net bridge by hand, and set the cable on the desk with deliberate care. The hanging end swayed once and came still. Mara looked at the altered curve on the raw field, then at the paper under her hand, then at the quiet cup, the straightened pen, the condensation ring now dry and complete. She wrote a second line beneath the first discipline. Second discipline. Every shortcut is also a signal. No one read it aloud. Beyond the glass, the corridor light hesitated again. This time, none of them looked up. The loose screw at the base of the sensor bridge did not settle when Ilian tightened it. He had turned the driver until resistance felt correct, then stopped. The screw head sat flush for a moment. Then it rotated back a fraction on its own, not enough to loosen, just enough to break alignment with the etched guide mark on the housing. Ilian did not touch it again. He lowered the driver to the desk, handle parallel to the seam, and left the screw as it was. Mara saw the misalignment without looking directly at it. It was the kind of thing that stayed in the corner of attention, like a word that didn't quite belong in a sentence. "Leave it," she said. "I am," he replied. On the raw display, the thin interruption remained where they had last tracked it, not growing, not fading, holding in a way that felt less like stability and more like refusal. The station clock ticked past 1710. They had closed more systems than they had opened. No external comms. No automated sync. Advisory layers offline. Internal classification routines paused, except were required to keep the life support grid from arguing with itself. Kepri Relay had narrowed its own awareness deliberately. It made the place feel smaller, but clearer. Senna stood by the partition again, one hand resting against the glass. She had shifted positions several times over the last hour, not pacing, just choosing new angles from which to see the room. Each move seemed to reset something in her reading of it. "Run the same pass again," she said. Ilian did, without asking which pass she meant. The system now had only a few. The strip stack made choices simple. Raw passive, Minimal interference. No descriptive overlays. The data came in as a field. Mara leaned forward slightly, pen hovering over the paper, but not touching it. The thread-like interruption appeared. Same curvature. Same position relative to the variance field. She exhaled once, quiet. Heron shifted his weight beside the terminal. No change. Senna said, "Say it differently." He looked at her, then at the display again. "We did not cause a change." "That's better." Mara marked the line. 1712. Repeated raw pass. No observed change following observation, without classification. The words were plain. They felt heavier than they looked. Ilian watched the holding buffer. "We need to test the boundary." Carefully, Mara said, "Yes." Heron glanced between them. "Boundary of what?" "Where observation becomes instruction," Senna answered. That was the first time anyone had phrased it that way. Mara wrote it down, but left it without a heading. They prepared the next step slowly. No one reached for the obvious tools. Instead, Ilian pulled up a low-level timing adjustment panel, something normally used to calibrate sensor lag against station rotation. It allowed him to introduce controlled delays into the data pipeline. Not changes to the data, changes to when it arrived. He looked at Mara. "If it's reacting to how we shape what we see, delay might matter." "Not content," she said. "Just sequence." He nodded. Senna moved closer. Small delay first. 2 milliseconds. Ilian said, "Less." He reduced it. The system accepted the input without complaint. The pass initiated. The field appeared again. Mara watched the thin interruption. It held. She did not write yet. "Again," Senna said. Ilian increased the delay slightly. Not enough to notice as lag. Enough to register as difference inside the system. The pass ran. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, at the edge of the interruption, a second line appeared. Fainter. Offset. Not parallel. Not random. Just enough to suggest that the system had begun to see more than it had before. Heron leaned in. "That wasn't there." "No," Mara said. She did not touch the pen. Senna's voice stayed even. "Remove the delay." Ilian did. The next pass returned to a single thread. The second line was gone. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Mara wrote, 1718, minimal delay introduced. Secondary structure appeared. Remove with delay removal. She paused, then added a second line beneath it. Sequence matters. The paper held both lines without judgment. Ilian rested both hands on the edge of the console. "It's not just what we say. It's when we decide we've seen something." Heron frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," Senna said. "It has to be consistent." Mara tapped the pen once against the paper. A small, controlled sound. "We need a cleaner test." "What kind?" Heron asked. "One that removes us. That's settled in the room differently than anything else so far." Ilian straightened. "We can automate the pass." "No," Mara said. He looked at her. "Automation brings assumptions, even stripped ones. We just removed half the station to get away from that." "Then what?" She glanced at the maintenance sheet, the pencil marks, the handwritten times, the absence of categories. "Passive recording," she said. "No immediate observation." Heron blinked. "You mean we don't look at it?" "For a fixed interval," she said. "We let the system collect raw data without us watching it form." Ilian considered it. "Then we review it after." "Yes." Senna nodded once. "Good." Heron shifted again. "And if it changes while we're not looking?" Mara met his gaze. "Then we learn something." He didn't argue. Ilian set the system to record raw passes into isolated storage. No live display. No buffer preview. He disconnected the monitor feed entirely. The main wall went dark, leaving only a small status line indicating active recording. The room changed with that. Not dramatically. Just enough. Without the constant presence of the field, the space felt less like a problem and more like a place again. The hum of the station came back into focus. The faint delay in the corridor lights. The warmth of the cup now nearly gone. Mara set the pen down. This time, the paper edge did not move. She noticed. She did not comment. Senna moved to the galley without a word and returned with another cup of water. She placed it on the desk, not near Mara, but near the center, equidistant from all of them, a neutral placement. Ilian glanced at it, then away. They waited. No one filled the time with talk. Heron sat on the edge of the spare chair, elbows on knees, looking at the dark screen as if something might still show through it. Mara watched the reflection in the glass partition instead. Their shapes, faint and slightly delayed, move when they did, but never quite in sync. She had noticed that before. She had not cared. Now she watched it carefully. At 1732, the station adjusted its orientation by a fraction. The hinge in the aft corridor made its dry sound. The loose screw at the base of the sensor bridge turned another degree. No one touched it. At 1740, the recording cycle completed. Ilian did not reconnect the display immediately. He looked at Mara. She nodded. He brought the data up on the side console first, not the main wall. No automatic rendering, just raw values. They leaned in together. The field appeared. The thread-like interruption was there, but it was different, not in shape, in density. The line held more information than before, as if the system had gathered more detail in their absence. Mara felt the difference without needing to quantify it. Heron pointed. It's thicker. Not thicker, Ilian said. More defined. Senna said nothing. Mara wrote, 1741, passive recording without observation. Increased detail and raw structure. She paused, then added, absence of immediate interpretation correlates with stability. Ilian scrolled to the recorded passes. Each one showed the same structure. No secondary lines. No curvature shifts. No response to anything, because nothing had been done. Heron leaned back slightly. So it doesn't like being watched? Mara shook her head. That's not precise. Then what? She looked at the paper, then at the screen, then at the loose screw, still misaligned. It doesn't like being concluded. The word sat in the air longer than it should have. Senna nodded slowly. Better. Ilian turned the monitor slightly, adjusting the angle. The reflection in the glass shifted. For a moment, Mara thought she saw the thread-like interruption mirrored in the partition. But when she focused on it, the reflection resolved into nothing but the room behind her. She did not write that down. Not yet. Instead, she drew a small line on the paper, matching the curve she had seen on the display. Not exact, just enough to hold the shape. The pencil moved smoothly. No resistance, no shift. When she lifted it, the line stayed as she had drawn it. No correction, no adjustment. She placed the pencil down beside the pen. Aligned. Still, Ilian said, we need to decide what to do with this. Not yet, Mara said. We can't keep isolating forever. No, she agreed. But we don't move until we know which actions are also instructions. Senna looked at both of them. And we don't assume we'll recognize the difference when it matters. That was the closest thing to warning anyone had said. The station lights held steady. The vent whispered. The cup at the center of the desk had cooled completely. No condensation ring formed beneath it this time. Mara closed the notebook. Not finished. Just paused. Her hand rested on the cover for a moment longer than necessary. Then she lifted it away. The loose screw turned one last fraction. Stopped. The shadow along the partition edge did not match the light. Mara noticed it when she shifted her chair back half a step. The corridor lights were steady. She had checked them twice since the last delay, but the thin line where the glass met the frame carried a darker band that should not have been there. Not darker in color, darker in timing. When she leaned slightly to the left, the shadow lagged behind by a fraction, then corrected itself as if it had remembered where it belonged. She stopped moving. The shadow held still. Ilian, she said. He was already looking. Don't adjust the lighting, she added. I won't. Senna came up beside them, not too close to the glass. Show me. Mara lifted her hand slowly and moved it toward the partition, stopping short of contact. The shadow followed. Then, just before her hand reached the surface, the shadow hesitated. A pause small enough to miss if you were not expecting it. Then it caught up, Heron made a quiet sound in the back of his throat. That's new. No, Mara said. That's consistent. He looked at her. With what? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she lowered her hand, then raised it again, repeating the motion with the same measured pace. The shadow repeated its hesitation. Ilian stepped closer, angling his head to reduce the reflection from the room lights. Not a delay in the glass. Not refraction. It's in the projection. Projection of what? Heron asked. Senna said, of expectation. No one corrected her. Mara turned away from the glass and back to the console. We're seeing it in 3 places now. The field, Ilian said. The desk, she added. And the partition, Senna finished. Heron folded his arms. Oh, we're seeing the same mistake 3 times. That's still a pattern, Mara said. He didn't argue. On the side console, the raw recording remained open. The thread-like structure held its shape, quiet and precise, unaffected by the absence of live observation. Mara placed her notebook on the desk and opened it to the last page. The 2 lines she had written earlier sat above the newer entries, all of them restrained, none of them claiming more than they had. She added another. 1755. Spatial projection shows delay relative to intended motion. She stopped there. No conclusion, just the observation. Ilian moved back to the sensor bridge. The loose screw was still misaligned. He did not correct it. Instead, he adjusted the bridge's orientation by a fraction, aligning it with a partition rather than the desk seam. Why? Heron asked. To see if alignment changes projection, Ilian said. He initiated a passive sweep. The raw data came in. Mara watched the screen. The thread held. No immediate change. Then, at the edge of the field, a faint distortion appeared. Not a second line this time, but a slight thickening, as if the boundary of the structure had been smudged. Heron pointed. There. Ilian nodded once. It shifted. Did we cause that? Heron asked. Mara didn't answer. She looked at the partition instead. The shadow line had returned to normal. No delay. No hesitation. Senna noticed her looking. It stopped. Yes. Because... Mara shook her head. We changed something. That's not the same as knowing what. No. Ilian adjusted the bridge back to its previous alignment. Another sweep. The distortion in the field reduced. Not gone entirely, but closer to the earlier state. Mara wrote, 1802, alignment change introduced minor deformation, partially reversible. She tapped the pen once against the page, then held it still. Heron paced once across the room, then stopped himself. This is getting worse. Senna looked at him. Define worse. He gestured toward the console, the glass, the desk. It's spreading. Mara closed the notebook gently. Or we're noticing more of it. That's the same thing if it keeps expanding. It isn't. He exhaled sharply, then caught himself and said nothing more. Ilian stepped away from the console and moved to the far wall, where a secondary monitoring panel sat unused. He powered it on manually, bypassing the station's default interface. The screen came to life slowly, its older hardware taking a moment to catch up. He configured it to display only environmental readings. Temperature, pressure, light levels. Nothing interpretive. Mara watched him work. Separate reference, she said. Yes. Senna nodded. Good. The panel stabilized. All readings normal, within expected variance. No anomalies. Heron looked between the 2 displays. So the environment is fine. According to instruments that rely on stable categories, Mara said. He frowned. Everything relies on categories. Exactly. That silenced him. Mara stood and walked back to the partition. This time, she did not raise her hand. She simply stood there, watching the edge where glass met frame. The shadow held steady. No delay. No movement. She shifted her weight slightly. The shadow followed without hesitation. She waited. Nothing changed. Behind her, Ilian ran another passive recording cycle. No live observation. No immediate interpretation. The system worked quietly. Senna remained near the desk, one hand resting on the back of the chair again, her posture unchanged. Heron had stopped pacing. He stood still now, arms at his sides, watching without trying to name what he saw. At 1820, the recording completed, Ilian brought up the data. The thread-like structure was still there, more defined than before. Not larger, not closer, just clearer. Mara turned from the partition and joined them. She leaned over the console, studying the field. The line she had drawn on paper earlier sat in her memory as a reference. This was sharper, more certain, without being named. She reached for the pencil, stopped, left it where it was. Instead, she looked at Ilian. Do it again. He nodded. Another recording cycle. No one spoke during it. No one moved more than necessary. The station seemed to settle into their restraint. Even the corridor lights held their timing without delay. When the cycle finished, the data came in. The structure held. No deformation. No shift. Mara exhaled once. Then she said, "We need to test one more thing." Ilian looked at her. "What?" She glanced at the main wall display. Still dark. Disconnected. "We bring the system back online." Heron's head snapped up. "That's a bad idea." "Yes," Mara said. "Then why?" "Because we need to know if the reaction scales." Senna stepped closer. "Not all at once." "No," Mara agreed. "One layer." Ilian hesitated for a moment. Then he moved to the control panel and reconnected a single advisory layer. Not the full system. Just enough to introduce categorization pressure without overwhelming the stack. The main wall flickered once, then stabilized. The raw field remained on the side console. The advisory layer began to process it, slowly, carefully, as if it had been waiting. Mara watched the thread-like structure. The system hesitated. Then, at the bottom of the wall display, a single line appeared. Possible boundary condition. No stronger label. No forced object. Just a suggestion. The thread on the raw display shifted. Not its position, its curvature. A subtle tightening, as if it had responded to the idea of a boundary by becoming one. Heron whispered, "It moved." Senna said, "We moved it." Mara did not speak. She reached out and disabled the advisory layer. The line vanished. The thread relaxed. Not back to its original form, but closer. She wrote, 1828, minimal categorization introduces structural response, partially reversible. She paused, then added, response aligns with suggestion. Ilian leaned back slightly. So it's not just reacting. No, Mara said. It's aligning. Senna nodded. With what we offer it. Heron looked at the screen, then at the paper, then at the partition. That means... Mara raised a hand slightly. He stopped. She closed the notebook again. This time, she did not reopen it. The room held its shape. The shadow along the partition edge remained steady. The loose screw stayed misaligned. The cup at the center of the desk had not moved. Ilian powered down the advisory layer completely. The main wall went dark again. Only the side console remained active. The thread-like structure held in its quiet form. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Senna said very softly, "We're not observing it." Mara looked at her. Senna met her gaze. "We're negotiating." The words settled into the room without resistance. Mara did not write it down. The air vent above the side console released a soft, uneven note. Not a change in volume, a change in shape. The steady stream of airflow broke for a fraction of a second, resumed, then broke again in the same place, like a word almost spoken and then withdrawn. Mara tilted her head slightly, listening. It happened again. A pause and flow, not random. Ilian looked up at the vent, then at the environmental panel. Pressure stable. "I know," Mara said. Senna remained by the desk, eyes on the console, but her attention had shifted. "Repeat it," she said quietly. Mara did not move. The vent sound came again. Pause. Flow. Heron rubbed one hand against his forearm, as if checking for static. "That's new." "No," Mara said. "It's consistent." He gave a short, quiet breath through his nose. "Everything is consistent now." "That's the problem," Ilian said. He stepped closer to the vent. not directly beneath it, but offset enough to avoid casting shadow. He raised one hand slowly, stopping well below the opening. The airflow continued. No interruption. He lowered his hand. The pause returned. Senna watched him, then shifted her stance slightly, changing her position relative to the console and the glass. The next pause came earlier, not by much, enough to notice. Mara turned back to the side console. The thread-like structure remained, steady and defined. She studied it without reaching for the pen, without reaching for anything. The room felt balanced on a narrow edge. Too much movement would tip it, but doing nothing was also a choice. She said, "We need to reduce further." Heron blinked. "There's not much left to reduce." "There is," Ilian said. He was already moving, not toward the sensors, toward the station itself. He crossed to the primary systems panel and began isolating non-essential feedback loops, lighting adjustments, environmental smoothing, minor correction routines that kept the station feeling seamless. One by one, he disabled them. The lights dimmed slightly, not dramatically, just enough that the edges of objects became more honest. The vent sound changed. The pauses became longer, then shorter, then settled into a new rhythm. Mara watched the console. The thread held. No deformation, no shift. Senna nodded once. Less interference. "Yes," Mara said. Heron leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely now. "So we just keep stripping things away until nothing's left?" "No," Mara said. "Then what?" She looked at the paper on the desk, at the lines she had written, at the absence of anything beyond observation. "We find the minimum required to see it without shaping it." "That sounds like nothing," he said. "It's not." Ilian returned from the systems panel. "We can go further." Mara looked at him. "How far?" He considered it. "Manual monitoring only. No background processes touching observation data." "That risks stability," Senna said. "It risks everything," he replied. She nodded. "Then we do it carefully." He began the sequence. Each step required confirmation. Each confirmation required intention. No automation. No shortcuts. The station responded slowly, reluctantly, as if it had been built to resist this kind of reduction. Mara stood still while he worked. She did not look at the partition, did not look at the vent, only the console. The thread remained, clear, precise, untouched. At 1852, the final loop disengaged. The station settled into a new state, quieter, simpler, less helpful. The vent sound smoothed. No pauses, no interruptions. The shadow along the partition held steady. The loose screw did not move. Mara felt the difference more than she saw it. A kind of pressure had lifted, or perhaps a kind of pressure had stopped being applied. She exhaled slowly. Ilian stepped back from the panel. "That's as far as we go without compromising life support." Senna looked around the room, taking in each detail. "It's enough." Heron pushed himself off the wall. "Now what?" Mara did not answer immediately. She walked to the desk, picked up the notebook, opened it. The lines stared back at her. First discipline, second discipline, the entries beneath them, all of it careful, all of it incomplete. She turned the page. Blank. She held the pen above it, waited, then lowered it, not to write, to rest it against the paper. The tip touched, stayed. No movement, no reaction. She lifted it again, looked at Ilian. "Introduce a change," she said. He frowned slightly. "What kind?" "One we control." "That's all of them," Heron said. "No," Mara said. "One we understand." Senna's eyes narrowed slightly. "Be precise." Mara nodded. She turned back to the console. "The thread aligns with suggestion," she said, "but only when the suggestion is present during observation." Ilian followed her thought. "So we introduce something before observation." "Yes." Heron shook his head. "That sounds the same." "It's not," Senna said. Mara continued. "We define a condition, not a category." Ilian's expression shifted. "A constraint." "Yes." He moved to the console. "Something simple," he said. "Simple." Mara agreed. He adjusted the input parameters. not the data. The frame. He defined a boundary in the observation space, not naming it, not describing it, just setting a limit, a region within which the system would accept data without interpretation. Outside it, nothing would be processed. A clean constraint. He looked at Mara. Ready. She nodded. He initiated the pass. The field appeared. The thread emerged within the defined boundary. Clear. Stable. Mara leaned forward slightly, watching, not writing. The thread did not shift, did not deform. It held. Heron exhaled. It's not reacting. No, Senna said. It's fitting. Mara felt the difference immediately. Not resistance, not response. Alignment. She said, adjust the boundary. Ilian did, slightly larger. The thread extended, not by growing, by revealing more of itself within the new limit. Mara's breath caught. Just for a moment, she steadied it. Again, she said. He adjusted again. The thread continued. Smooth, continuous. No breaks. No distortions. Heron stared at the screen. It was always that big. No, Mara said. We just weren't seeing it. Senna nodded slowly. Because we were trying to decide what it was. Mara did not look away from the console. Keep going, she said. Ilian expanded the boundary further. The thread curved, became part of a larger shape. Not closed, not complete, but coherent. Mara reached for the pencil. Stopped. Let it rest. She watched. The shape continued to emerge. Not reacting, not resisting, just existing within the space they allowed. Heron whispered, It's not hiding. No, Mara said. It never was. The room held still around them. No vent interruptions. No shadow delays. No movement from the screw. Only the slow, careful expansion of the boundary, and the quiet revelation of what had been there all along. Mara felt something shift, not in the station, not in the data, but in the way the room held itself. Less tension, more clarity. She said, Stop. Ilian froze the boundary. The shape held, incomplete, unresolved, but present. Mara stepped back from the console, looked at the paper, at the blank page. She did not write. Instead, she closed the notebook, set it down, aligned with the desk edge. The cup at the center remained still. The partition reflected the room without delay. The station held its reduced state. Senna spoke quietly. We don't need to finish it. Mara nodded. Ilian powered down the observation stack. Not abruptly, carefully, step by step. The console dimmed. The field faded. The thread disappeared. Not gone, just no longer being asked to appear. The room returned to itself. Simple, quiet, ordinary. Mara rested her hand on the desk. Flat, still, the surface did not move. She left it there for a moment, then lifted it away. The chair near the partition had shifted a few centimeters from where it had been earlier. No one had moved it, Mara noticed, because one leg no longer aligned with the faint scuff on the floor panel beneath it. The mark had been there for years, worn into the surface by repeated contact. Now the chair sat just beyond it, as if someone had pulled it back slightly and forgotten to return it. She stood still, looking at it, not questioning, not correcting, just noticing. Behind her, the station had begun to rebuild itself. Ilian had reactivated the first layer of background systems 15 minutes ago. Environmental smoothing, light regulation, minor corrective loops that made the place feel continuous again. Each step had been deliberate, spaced apart, observed before the next was allowed. Nothing had reacted. No delays. No distortions. The vent ran steady. The partition reflected cleanly. The loose screw remained misaligned, exactly as they had left it. Mara walked to the chair and placed her hand on the backrest. She did not move it. Her fingers rested there, light, without pressure. The chair did not respond. She left it as it was and stepped away. At the console, Ilian was bringing the advisory layer back online in stages. Not fully, never fully, just enough to test whether the system could exist alongside what they had learned without overriding it. Senna stood beside him, watching the sequence. Slow, she said. I am, he replied. Heron remained near the galley entrance, quieter now than he had been earlier, not withdrawn, just more careful with where he placed himself in the room. The console display remained minimal. No categories, no suggestions, just raw data, waiting. Mara returned to the desk. The notebook lay where she had left it, aligned with the edge. The pen rested beside it. She opened it again. The last written line stared back. Disciplines, observations, constraints. Nothing more. She turned to the blank page, held the pen above it, waited, then wrote, "Final condition. Observation without imposition reveals continuity." She paused. Read it once. Did not add anything else. Closed the notebook. The act felt complete without needing to say why. At the console, the advisory layer initialized. A single line appeared. Analysis ready. No further prompt. No suggestion. Ilian looked at Mara. She nodded once. He did not engage it. Instead, he left it waiting. Senna approved with a small tilt of her head. "Let it exist," she said. "Yes," Mara replied. Heron shifted his weight. "So what do we do now?" No one answered immediately. The question hung in the room, not urgent, not demanding resolution. Mara walked to the partition again. The shadow along the edge held steady. No delay, no hesitation. She raised her hand slightly. The reflection followed perfectly. She lowered it. Everything remained aligned. Behind her, the station continued its slow return to normal operation. Systems came back online one by one. Each one observed. Each one accepted. No anomalies. No reactions. The room felt whole again, but not unchanged. Mara turned back. The chair remained slightly out of place. The screw still misaligned. The notebook closed. The cup at the center of the desk now empty. She moved to the console, looked at the inactive advisory prompt. Then at Ilian. "We don't need it," she said. He understood. He powered the advisory layer down again, not because it was dangerous, because it was unnecessary. Senna watched the sequence complete. "Good," she said. Heron let out a slow breath. "So that's it." Mara considered the question, then shook her head slightly. "No." He waited. She looked at the desk, at the paper, at the small, deliberate details they had left untouched. "We just stop interfering," she said. He frowned. "And whatever it is?" She met his gaze. "We don't decide that." He nodded slowly, understanding, or at least accepting. Ilian finished restoring the last of the essential systems. The station settled into its usual rhythm, not the reduced state from before, not the fully automated one from earlier. Something in between, balanced. Senna moved to the galley and began preparing fresh water. The simple routine felt appropriate. Mara returned to the desk. She adjusted the pen slightly, not to align it, just to place it where it felt right. The notebook remained closed. She did not open it again. The chair near the partition stayed out of alignment. No one corrected it. The loose screw remained turned just enough to be noticed. No one tightened it. The station lights held steady. The vent whispered evenly. Outside, beyond the relay, the dark remained unchanged. Whatever had been there still was. Unobserved, unshaped, present. Mara stood quietly for a long moment. Then she moved to the console one last time. Not to activate anything, just to look. The raw display was empty. No field, no thread, no structure. Nothing asked to appear. She nodded once, almost to herself, then stepped away. Ilian powered down the side console. The screen faded. Senna set 4 cups on the desk, evenly spaced. No one reached for them immediately. Heron looked around the room, taking in the small details. The chair, the screw, the notebook, the cups. He did not speak. Mara rested her hand lightly on the desk again. Flat, still, the surface remained unchanged. She lifted her hand, turned, and walked toward the corridor. No urgency, no hesitation, just movement. The others followed, one by one. The room remained as they left it, quiet, ordered, slightly imperfect. The chair stayed where it was. The screw held its misalignment. The notebook remained closed. The cups cooled slowly in the still air. Beyond the partition, the corridor lights cycled without delay. The station continued its work, uninterrupted, unremarked, and far outside, beyond reach and naming, something remained exactly as it had been, not waiting, not responding, simply there. No one said anything more.